So we're very pleased to have Dr. Debbie Wilson with us today. Dr. Wilson is Associate Athletic Director for Academic Services at George Mason University, a licensed psychologist, has a private psychotherapy and sport psychology practice in Washington, D.C. She's the most recent past chair of the NCAA's Committee on Sportsmanship and Ethical Conduct and currently serves on the NCAA's Mental Health Task Force. Dr. Wilson earned her PhD in counseling psychology from the University of Maryland. She's worked as a psychologist in student counseling centers at Maryland and at George Washington University, where she provided psychotherapy and sports psychology services to student athletes. Prior to becoming a psychologist, she was also the women's basketball coach at The Ohio State University. So it's really, I had fun talking with her last night at dinner about going from a head basketball coach at Ohio State and then getting into the psychological component there. So it's really quite a track that you've had. One thing that you'll be seeing on campus, and I know that Dr. Wilson is going to touch on it as well, is an NCAA best practices document called Addressing Sexual Assault and Interpersonal Violence. Dr. Wilson was the author of this publication, and it's going out to every D1, D2, and D3 institution and conference offices as well. So without further ado, we really thank Dr. Wilson for coming in, being a part of the Peach Belt Fall SAAC meeting. Thank you so much for working us into your schedule. Dr. Wilson.
First of all, it's a pleasure to be here. This is a program I have given one time. This just came off the press last week. It's already been distributed on Capitol Hill. This is a huge topic, and I hope by the end of this talk you're going to have a much better understanding of the role you in particular can play in addressing this issue. It is not just simply a responsibility that you have, which I'm sure many people will talk with you about. It is the opportunity that you have. And I'm going to take you, as we go through this, a little bit through what this process was for me. Although I'm a psychologist, I am not an expert in sexual assault prevention, response, or recovery. But what happened, the way this evolved, was in 2010, when I was on the Committee on Sportsmanship and Ethical Conduct. It was a particularly disturbing year in the sense of it seemed like every 3 to 4 weeks we were reading in the national news about another college student athlete who was being accused of a major assault crime. It might have been rape, it might have been aggravated assault. One of the most crimes that got the most national attention. Some of you may remember it may be before the generation of most of you in here, was at the University of Virginia, a male lacrosse player, George Hughley, murdered his intimate partner who was a member of the women's lacrosse team, and Yardley Love. And so this was getting national attention. We on the committee, being concerned not just with sportsmanship, but ethical conduct, were very concerned about this. And we sent forward a suggestion to the executive committee of the association that college athletics could do more and we should be doing more. Now, if any of you have ever been on a committee that made a recommendation of work, this whole thing boomeranged back on us, and it was like, excellent. This will be a major initiative of the NCAA, and you're in charge of it. So the next year, I became the chair of the committee, and I'm not going to go through the whole history. But one of the things that happened to us as a committee is something that probably the administrators in this room can relate to. When you start to get into this topic, it starts to mushroom. The moment you open the door and then you say, well, what does the research say? Well, what are best practices? Well, what would a conceptual framework be? How do we get our arms around all these moving pieces? And that's what our committee was trying to do for the membership. The membership of the NCAA, as some of you may know, is each member institution, each college or university that participates in the NCAA. How could we come up with something meaningful? It went through an evolutionary process. In 2012, probably what gave us our substantive base was with NCAA support, we had a violence prevention think tank in Washington, D.C. that brought together 20 leading experts across the nation. There were only 3 people with athletics backgrounds: a commissioner of a conference, myself, and an athletic administrator. There's also the NCAA staff. But participating in the conference, everyone else was a leading national expert. They did not have a background in athletics, but they knew their area. They knew policy, they knew law, they knew victim advocacy, they knew the research. What came out of that was 4 standing committees on the Committee on Sportsmanship and Ethical Conduct. And at that time, we thought we're going to come out with kind of a toolkit in each of these areas: research, collaboration, best practices, scope and terminology. Well, it became apparent that, yes, that would help the NCAA look like it was doing something. Yes, it would put something out before the membership, but not in a conceptual framework. It wouldn't be broad enough. It wouldn't be helpful enough. And that's how the suggestion for this guide came about. What we're talking about is more than just sexual assault and interpersonal violence. We are talking about athletics' role. Athletics is not an entity. It is people. It is you. This is who makes up athletics, is every person in this room. What is your role? What is your institution's role? What is your athletic department's role in supporting healthy and safe campuses? You really don't have a choice. The good news is you've already built the infrastructure to become involved in this. You already have it going. You already have those connections. At the back of the guide there are 3 appendices that list your partners on your campus for prevention, response, and recovery. And these are written generally enough so that they apply to every campus, specifically enough that you can see what you can get from the different departments. We have to have collaboration. It must, however, start within athletics. This is where we have our first and most primary responsibility as a group. Any one of you individually, please feel free to get involved in anything on your campuses. But when we talk about athletics, we must deal with what's at home. You are the best hope. And I sincerely believe that from my background in athletics and knowing what goes on athletic teams. You are the best positioned group on campus to make a change. Again, thank you. It's been a pleasure. I want them to be much more aware of the risk, the vulnerability, and the prevalence of these crimes, because our campuses right now are not safe. These crimes are happening at an unacceptable rate. We have got to stop them. We have got to address them and do something about them. And the second part is our student athletes have an amazing opportunity to change the culture. And if they're willing to step forward and stop that process, I think we in athletics can make a major contribution, not just to athletics, but to our whole campus cultures. Yeah, as I mentioned a little in the talk, I never intended when I started this to be a primary author or an editor. I was really just going to shepherd other experts through it. And what I found is that what they were submitting either was written in a voice that wouldn't people in athletics probably wouldn't respond to effectively, meaning it was too legalistic or too academic, or it just didn't speak to athletics. And that's when I began to be concerned. We had to have the athletics perspective so that our community could understand how this is affecting them and what they could do about it. They can make this change happen. There are people on their campuses. They may not individually feel they have the resources or the knowledge, but they have people on their campuses that if they have a conceptual framework to work within and an action plan, they have resources on their campus. And they probably already know many of these people. And if they can pull them together, it's the collaboration. But underneath it all, who's going to really make this change happen? It's the student athletes. It's not the staff. We have got to reach them and help them understand the role they can play in this.